On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 young adventurers pitched their tent on the slopes of Kolat-Syakhl, a remote mountain in the Ural range of Soviet Russia. They were experienced hikers, united by a shared love of exploration and a desire to push the limits of human endurance. But that night would be their last. When their bodies were discovered weeks later, the scene baffled investigators. A torn tent, footprints leading into the wilderness, and injuries so severe they seemed impossible without a weapon. The mystery of what happened to them became one of the most chilling and enduring unsolved cases in modern history, the Dyatlov Pass incident. Before we can delve into the mystery, we must first understand the people at its center, the hikers themselves. Who were they? What drove them to embark on this treacherous journey, and what did they hope to find in the icy wilderness? The group consisted of 8 men and 2 women, all students or graduates of Ural Polytechnic Institute, a prestigious engineering university. Igor Dyatlov, the 23-year-old leader of the expedition, was the glue that held the group together. Charismatic, meticulous and experienced, Igor was respected and trusted by his team. This journey was a Level 3 hiking expedition, the most difficult category at the time, and Igor had carefully chosen each participant for their skills and compatibility. But who were the others? Zinaida Kolmogorova, or Zina, was 22 years old. Bright and determined, she was one of the few women on the team and a seasoned hiker in her own right. Friends described her as adventurous but warm-hearted, often boosting group morale with her optimism. Zina was no stranger to challenging expeditions, and she was ready to prove herself yet again. Yuri Doroshenko, also 21, was known for his bravery. On a prior hike, he'd faced down a bear armed only with a geologist's hammer. Though quiet and reserved, Yuri's courage under pressure earned him the respect of his peers. Rustem Slobodin, 23, was a man of many talents. An athlete and a dedicated student, he was drawn to the mountains by a love for nature. His friends often joked about his meticulous planning, an invaluable trait on a trek like this. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20, was the youngest of the group, but far from inexperienced. A tough and outspoken woman, Lyudmila had a passion for hiking and a sharp intellect. She had earned a reputation for her resilience after enduring a previous trek with severe frostbite. Then there was Alexander Kolevatov, 24, a meticulous and disciplined man who thrived in academic settings but found freedom in the outdoors. Yuri Krivonishenko, 23, was the joker of the group, often lightening the mood with humor and antics. His playful personality made him the heart of the team. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, a 23-year-old with a French-Russian background, brought an element of cosmopolitan charm to the group. Reserved but deeply intelligent, Nikolai was driven by a desire to excel in all aspects of life. And finally, there were the 2 most mysterious figures, Semyon Zolotaryov and Yuri Yudin. Semyon, 38, was the oldest member of the group. A veteran of World War II and a hiking instructor, his presence raised questions. Why had this older, experienced hiker joined a group of students on such a grueling trek? Yuri Yudin, 21, was the sole survivor of the expedition, not because of fate, but because illness forced him to turn back before the group entered the mountains. It is through Yuri's recollections that we know much of what transpired in the days before disaster struck. Together, these 9 hikers set out on January 25, 1959. Their destination, Otorten Mountain. The name, in the language of the local Mansi people, means "don't go there." For them, it was a place of superstition and caution. But for the hikers, it was another challenge to conquer. Armed with supplies, journals and cameras, they documented their journey in meticulous detail, unaware it would soon end in tragedy. Mountains are more than just physical challenges. They are places of legend, fear, and reverence. To the hikers of the Dyatlov expedition, the Ural Mountains were a playground, a chance to test themselves against the wilderness. But to the indigenous Mansi people, this landscape was alive with stories, some of them warnings. To understand the events of Dyatlov Pass, we must first explore the history of this forbidding region and the hikers who came before. The Ural Mountains stretch over 2,500 kilometers, forming a natural divide between Europe and Asia. These ancient peaks, weathered by time, are shrouded in mystery. One mountain in particular, Syakhl, holds a foreboding name: Dead Mountain. The name comes not from hikers like Igor Dyatlov and his team, but from the Mansi, the indigenous people of this region. To the Mansi, Syakhl is a sacred place, one that carries an aura of danger. They believe the mountain is cursed, and stories passed down through generations warn travelers to stay away. The hikers were aware of the Mansi legends, but dismissed them as superstition. After all, this was not the first time such warnings had been issued in the mountains, and those who had come before had largely returned unscathed. In the years leading up to 1959, the Ural Mountains had become a proving ground for ambitious hikers and climbers. Soviet youth groups, university clubs, and military teams frequently organized treks through these rugged landscapes, testing their skills and endurance against the elements. Igor Dyatlov himself had completed numerous expeditions, many in far harsher conditions. One of his most notable achievements was a trek to Mount Otorten, the very destination of this ill-fated journey. For Dyatlov and his team, this was meant to be the crowning achievement in their hiking careers, a Level 3 expedition, the most difficult classification in Soviet hiking. But these expeditions were not without risk. In the years prior, several hiking teams had encountered severe weather, injuries, and even fatalities in the Urals. One such incident, though not widely publicized, occurred in the late 1940s when a group of hikers was caught in a sudden snowstorm. 3 members of the team perished from exposure before rescue teams could arrive. These tragedies, however, were seen as rare and avoidable. With proper preparation, hikers believed they could overcome anything nature threw at them. Igor Dyatlov's meticulous planning reflected this mindset. He studied maps, coordinated supply drops, and ensured his team was equipped for the bitter cold. In January 1959, the Dyatlov team arrived in the small village of Vizhay, the last point of civilization before their trek began. Vizhay was a hub for hikers, a place to rest and gather last-minute supplies. Here, the team met locals, shared stories, and prepared themselves for the journey ahead. The villagers accustomed to hosting hikers noticed nothing unusual about the group. They were confident, organized, and well-prepared. But as they departed, an ominous warning lingered in the air. An elderly Mansi man, upon hearing of their destination, shook his head and said, "That is a place where spirits dwell." The hikers laughed it off. Despite such warnings, the hikers had reason to feel optimistic. The Urals had tested them before, and they had always returned victorious. But the mountains are unpredictable, and even the most experienced teams can be caught off guard. What lay ahead would push them to their limits and beyond. Before we move forward, consider this. The hikers were not the first to pass through this region, but they are the most infamous. Was their fate a result of hubris, ignoring the warnings of those who knew the land best? Or was there something unique about this particular expedition, something that set it apart from all the others? On January 25, 1959, 9 hikers embarked on a journey that was meant to be a triumph of endurance and skill. For Igor Dyatlov and his team, this was not just another trek. It was a challenge to their abilities, a badge of honor. But as they moved deeper into the Ural Mountains, the joy and camaraderie of the trip began to shift. The landscape grew colder, the winds sharper, and the trail more treacherous. This is the story of their journey, the laughter, the struggles, and the final steps into the unknown. The group's journey began in Sverdlovsk, now known as Yekaterinburg. From there they travelled by train to the small town of Ivdel. The ride was long, but spirits were high. Photos from this part of the trip show smiling faces, friends playing cards, and the group singing songs. From Ivdel they took a truck to Vizhai, the last village before the wilderness. Vizhai was a quiet, snow-covered settlement where the team spent their final night indoors. It was here that Yuri Yudin, plagued by chronic back pain, made the difficult decision to turn back. He watched as his friends prepared for the trek, not knowing he would never see them alive again. Yudin's departure reduced the group to 9, but they were undeterred. Carrying heavy packs filled with food, tents, cameras and diaries, they set out into the snow-covered wilderness, their destination Mount Otorten, a remote and forbidding peak nearly 10 kilometers from their campsite on that fateful night. Over the first few days, the team made steady progress, recording their experiences in journals and photographs. Zinaida Kolmogorova wrote in her diary about the biting cold, which reached as low as -30 degrees Celsius at night. Despite the freezing conditions, the group remained upbeat. They built a small stove to warm their tent, shared jokes, and took turns writing in their diaries. One entry read, "The sun smiles at us, but the frost nips our faces. We will conquer this mountain together." The photos from these days show the group's camaraderie. Playful snowball fights, solemn portraits against the vast snowy backdrop, and even light-hearted moments where Yuri Krivonichenko posed in comical stances, his antics earning laughs from the others. On January 31st, the group reached the edge of a dense forest. They camped here for the night, preparing for the most challenging part of their journey, the ascent toward Otorten. They cached some supplies in the forest to lighten their load for the climb, a decision that would later haunt investigators who found these untouched provisions weeks later. The next morning, February 1st, the hikers began their trek up Kolatsiakl. The weather had turned and visibility was poor with heavy snow and strong winds. They veered slightly off course, possibly due to the worsening conditions. Instead of reaching a more sheltered area, they found themselves on an exposed slope. Rather than backtrack to find cover, Igor Dyatlov decided to set up camp on the open mountainside. The decision, while puzzling to some, was likely strategic. Camping on the slope would give them practice for similar situations in future expeditions and keep them from losing the elevation they had gained. But it also left them vulnerable to the harsh winds and frigid temperatures. As darkness fell on February 1st, the group prepared for the night. They pitched their tent, shared a meal, and wrote their final journal entries. One entry read, "We are tired, but we are keeping warm. Tomorrow will be easier." But something happened that night, something so terrifying and sudden that it forced the group to slash open their tent from the inside and flee into the freezing wilderness. They left behind their boots, coats, and even their provisions, venturing out into the snow in a desperate bid for survival. What could have driven these experienced hikers into the night, unprepared and vulnerable? Theories range from natural disasters to something far more sinister. The answers lie not just in their actions, but in the condition of their bodies when they were finally discovered. When the search parties finally located the hikers' remains, what they found defied explanation. At first glance, the scene suggested panic, utter chaos, but upon closer examination, the evidence uncovered told a story that was as chilling as it was confounding. To understand the mystery of Dyatlov Pass, we must look at the injuries. the kind that no ordinary hiking accident could explain. The first discovery came on February 26th, when searchers found the hiker's tent. It was slashed open from the inside, as though they had fled in a desperate hurry. Outside the tent, footprints led down the slope toward the forest, barefoot, wearing only socks or hastily donned shoes. Not far from the edge of the forest, under a towering cedar tree, the bodies of Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko were found. They were dressed in only their underwear, their hands raw and bloody, with skin embedded in the bark of the cedar tree. It appeared they had tried desperately to climb for safety or warmth. Both showed signs of hypothermia, but their injuries hinted at something more sinister. Burns on their legs and feet, and strangely, one had foam around his mouth. Moving further into the forest, searchers found 3 more bodies: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. Unlike the first 2, they were dressed more warmly, as though they had attempted to return to the tent. Their bodies were scattered along a line, each one slightly closer to the tent than the last. Igor was found clutching a tree branch, his body positioned as though he had fought to crawl back uphill. Zina had abrasions on her face and knuckles, and her cause of death was ruled as hypothermia. Rustem, however, suffered a fractured skull. Though this injury wasn't immediately fatal, it was consistent with a significant blow, something one might expect in a violent fall or an attack. The final 4 hikers weren't discovered until May, hidden under 4 meters of snow in a ravine nearly 75 meters from the cedar tree. This is where the story takes an even darker turn. Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov and Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles were found with injuries so severe that they baffled even experienced pathologists. Lyudmila was missing her tongue, eyes and part of her lips. The official report claimed these injuries were caused by post-mortem decay, but their specificity and extent have fueled speculation for decades. Her chest was also crushed, as though from tremendous pressure. Her ribs fractured in ways typically seen in car crash victims. Semyon Zolotaryov suffered similar chest injuries, with 5 broken ribs and massive internal damage, yet no external wounds to explain the trauma. Both Lyudmila and Semyon appeared to have died instantly from their injuries. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had a fractured skull so severe it would have been fatal on its own. Alexander Kolevatov's body showed less dramatic injuries, but his neck was twisted unnaturally, and his clothing contained trace amounts of radiation. These injuries were unlike anything seen in typical hiking accidents. The fractured ribs and skulls suggested immense force, far more than a simple fall could account for. Yet, strangely, there were no external wounds on the bodies to match the internal trauma, as if they had been subjected to crushing pressure without impact. Even more curious was the presence of radiation on some of the hikers' clothing, a detail that raised questions of government experiments or secret weapons tests in the area. And what about Lyudmila Dubinina? The loss of her tongue and eyes, combined with her position in the ravine, fueled macabre theories. Was this the work of scavenging animals or something far more sinister? How could one group of hikers, all experienced and prepared, meet such varied and horrifying fates? Could natural phenomena account for the injuries, or was something or someone responsible for their deaths? The answers remain elusive, but one thing is certain. The mystery of Dyatlov Pass has endured for over 6 decades, defying explanation. Since the discovery of the Dyatlov Pass tragedy, the question has lingered. What really happened to those 9 hikers on that frozen February night in 1959? Decades of speculation have given rise to a host of theories, some rooted in science, others venturing into the realm of the extraordinary. Now we'll explore the most controversial explanations: extraterrestrial visitors, a violent encounter with a mysterious creature, secret military experiments, and the whispers of ancient supernatural forces. One of the most enduring theories revolves around the skies above Dyatlov Pass. UFO sightings were not uncommon in the Soviet Union during the 1950s, and several witnesses later claimed to have seen strange orange lights in the sky on the night the hikers died. These lights were described as glowing orbs, moving erratically through the atmosphere. Could the hikers have witnessed something they weren't meant to see? An alien craft, perhaps? Proponents of this theory point to the burns on Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko's bodies, as well as the unexplained radiation found on some of the hikers' clothing. Was it a close encounter gone horribly wrong? Critics, however, dismiss the alien theory as far-fetched. The lights in the sky could have been military flares or meteors, and the radiation levels, while unusual, were not alarmingly high. Still, the idea persists, fueled by the hikers' seemingly irrational behavior and the violent force that some of them appeared to encounter. Another theory points not to the skies, but to the forests. Some speculate that the hikers were attacked by a cryptid, a creature known locally as the menk, a Siberian yeti. Supporters of this theory argue that the hikers' injuries, crushed ribs, fractured skulls, and the missing tongue of Lyudmila Dubinina could be consistent with a brutal attack by a powerful humanoid predator. Adding to the intrigue is a photograph found on one of the hikers' cameras, showing what some interpret as a dark, blurry figure in the distance. Could it have been a menk stalking the hikers, driving them from their tent in terror? But skeptics point out there is no physical evidence of such a creature in the area, and the injuries can likely be explained by other means. Still, for cryptid enthusiasts, the possibility of an encounter with the unknown keeps this theory alive. Perhaps the most compelling and sinister theory involves the Soviet government. Dyatlov Pass lies near a region used for military testing, including parachute mines and rocket experiments. Could the hikers have stumbled upon a secret weapons test? Some investigators believe the hikers' deaths could have been caused by a blast wave from a nearby explosion. This would explain the internal injuries without external wounds, as well as the odd orange tint to their skin reported during their funerals. The presence of radiation on the hikers' clothing has also been tied to government experiments. Could it have come from exposure to radioactive materials, or were the hikers part of an elaborate cover-up silenced to protect state secrets? Evidence for this theory includes reports of altered or missing documents in the official investigation, as well as alleged sightings of military personnel near the search site. But as with many Soviet-era mysteries, the lack of transparency makes it impossible to confirm or deny the government's role. Finally, we turn to the supernatural. The Mansi people, who revere the mountains as sacred, have long warned of spirits inhabiting the region. Some believe the hikers may have angered these entities, triggering their wrath. The strange behavior of the hikers, fleeing their tent barefoot into the freezing cold, has been interpreted by some as evidence of possession or a psychological attack by an otherworldly force. Others point to the eerie calmness of their final journal entries, as though they were under some kind of trance. But skeptics argue that there is no hard evidence of supernatural involvement. The hikers' behavior could be attributed to hypothermia-induced delirium, a condition known to cause confusion and irrational decisions. Each of these theories offers a piece of the puzzle, but none can fully explain every aspect of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Were the hikers victims of an accident, a predator, or something far more sinister? For decades, the mystery of Dyatlov Pass has baffled investigators, historians, and enthusiasts. Theories of aliens, yetis, and secret military experiments have dominated the conversation. But as time passes, a scientific explanation has emerged as the most plausible. Finally, we explore the theory of katabatic winds, a rare but deadly phenomenon, and how a series of tragic events rooted in science and nature may finally explain what happened to Igor Dyatlov and his team. Katabatic winds are powerful, downward-moving gusts of cold air, often associated with mountainous or polar regions. These winds can form suddenly, sweeping down slopes at hurricane-like speeds. While rare, they are capable of creating conditions so extreme that even the most experienced hikers can be caught off guard. On February 1st, 1959, the Dyatlov team pitched their tent on the exposed slopes of Kholat-Syakhl just below the summit. This decision, while puzzling to some, was likely made to avoid the risks of avalanches in the valleys below. What they didn't anticipate was that this location would leave them vulnerable to the full force of the elements. The katabatic wind theory suggests that, during the night, the hikers encountered a sudden and violent weather event. These winds would have roared down the mountainside, carrying with them bitterly cold air and creating an unbearable chill. The tent, though expertly set up, may have begun to collapse or tear under the force of the wind. Inside, the group would have faced a dire decision: stay in the tent and risk being buried or suffocated, or flee into the night and try to seek shelter elsewhere. Evidence from the site supports this theory. The tent was found slashed from the inside, indicating a frantic escape. The hikers, many of them barefoot or in minimal clothing, fled downhill toward the tree line. It's likely they intended to regroup and build a fire to wait out the storm. The first group of hikers, Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko, managed to reach the forest. They attempted to build a fire, but with temperatures plummeting to -30 degrees Celsius and wind gusts continuing, their efforts were in vain. Both succumbed to hypothermia near the remains of their makeshift fire. The next group, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin and Igor Dyatlov, attempted to return to the tent but collapsed along the way. Their bodies were found at varying distances, each showing signs of exhaustion and the effects of extreme cold. The remaining four, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault Brignolel, and Semyon Zolotaryov, ventured deeper into the forest, likely in search of better shelter. They were found weeks later in a ravine, buried beneath several feet of snow. Their injuries, fractured skulls, broken ribs, and Dubinina's missing tongue, initially seemed inexplicable. But experts now believe these injuries were caused by a fall into the ravine, compounded by the weight of snow and ice that built up over time. The missing tongue and eyes, though horrifying, were likely the result of scavenging animals and natural decomposition. The katabatic wind theory is supported by modern reconstructions, including simulations conducted by researchers using advanced meteorological models. In 2021, a study published in Communications, Earth and Environment provided further evidence showing how the wind could have created conditions that forced the hikers to flee. Combined with the possibility of a small slab avalanche, a localized shift of snow that can mimic the effects of a full avalanche, this theory offers a cohesive explanation for the tragedy. While the katabatic wind theory resolves many of the unanswered questions, it doesn't erase the tragedy of what happened. 9 young, skilled hikers, full of life and ambition, were lost to the unforgiving wilderness. Their story reminds us of the power of nature and the fragility of human life in the face of its extremes. Still, for some, the mystery of Dyatlov Pass remains unsolved. Theories of aliens, government conspiracies, and supernatural forces persist, fueled by the strange and unsettling details of the case. But whether it was nature or something else, one fact is undeniable. The events of that night changed the lives of 9 families and etched Dyatlov Pass into the annals of history as one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of our time. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of the Dyatlov Pass mystery. Perhaps we will never know the full truth, but their story will continue to captivate and inspire us for generations to come. My name is Arthur Pembroke, and this is Nightmare Theatre. I'll see you again tomorrow night.